You are watching Breakthrough News, and now you are watching the Freedom Side. Sorry about that, dear listeners. We had a little technical issue. It happens to the best of us, but you are here. You are watching the Freedom Side. We are live. This is for real at this moment, and I at least think that's the signal I'm getting here that you can hear me. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Sorry about those initial technical issues. We've got a great show for you here coming up, as we always do on the Freedom Side, 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. We're going to be talking about the brutal conditions in South Carolina prisons. We've got family members of individuals who are currently incarcerated in South Carolina and who are also working around issues to change these conditions, but those on the inside who are advocating are being retaliated against in a just terrible way. So we're going to get more into what's going on in South Carolina, in the prison specifically, and what people are doing to fight back. So that will be later in the show, so certainly stick around for that. We are also very honored to have an interview with Mr. Patrick Warren Jr. Now, he is the son of Patrick Warren Sr., who was murdered on his own lawn in front of his own house in early January. And the body cam footage has come out in the past week. You may have seen it. We'll talk more about it. But we have his son, Patrick Warren Jr., who is obviously fighting for justice for his father, but also doing a lot to fight to change the situation with how policing address or how mental health is addressed by the police to prevent situations like this in the future. His father was in the midst of a mental health episode when he was murdered by Killeen, Texas police, I should note. But before we get to either of those two stories, which are very important, we're going to have another one, but I want to just say before we move on here, please take this time, take this moment, share this live stream. Wherever you're watching, make sure that everyone who's following you can follow us. So just take a quick second, hit that share button. Just giving you a second here. Okay, I'm going to assume that you have shared it now. Please share it and share it throughout the show so everyone can see the fantastic guests that we have. But before we get into some of the great guests we have and some of the later segments, I wanted to start with an issue that I think is critically important. It's maybe a relatively small piece of news as of this week, but this story will definitely grow. And that is the issue of a group of Boogaloo Boys, so-called, who were arrested, one of whom was arrested based on his involvement, or at least alleged involvement, you can say at this stage, in the situation in Minneapolis over the summer, the burning down of the 3rd precinct. And this individual from the Boogaloo Boys was there, and he's, what the authorities are alleging, part of a broader conspiracy with some of his compatriots in Texas to take events that were happening during the uprising against racism that swept this country last year, really swept the world. You see what happened in the UK and France, other places that were also, you know, being pushed by this momentum, that essentially that this was part of maybe a small plot, but I think the implication a larger plot. So I think this is an important story. Now, right now, it's mainly a story in Minneapolis, a little bit of a story in Texas, but I think that you're going to see this story come back up in a big way. And there are two major implications. The first of which, well, there's more than two, but two major ones. The first one really is an attempt to return to what we saw really at the height of the events there in Minneapolis, which is an attempt to redefine what took place there, to define it as anything other than righteous anger, to create the impression that somehow it was outside agitators, and in this case, radical right-wing white supremacist type individuals. Now, we were there on the ground in Minneapolis, our Breakthrough News team, and in the thick of it, that was also being said. Everything possible was being said in order to make it seem as if this was not legitimate at all, and that anything other than quote-unquote peaceful protest, a loaded term, that anything other than that was just being manipulated by, I mean, they were going with everyone from, you know, white supremacists to Russia to anarchists to whoever they could find. Anything that would make it seem like this was not an organic uprising of the people of Minneapolis, totally outraged at the murder of George Floyd, and quite frankly, totally outraged because what they saw with George Floyd was indicative of what had been happening for years with zero accountability. And I think that with the context that we see, the Democrats, Joe Biden, the president, some individuals in Congress pushing for this issue of a new domestic terrorism law, an attempt to really tighten the noose, for lack of a better term, around all domestic dissent, but it will be push forward as, well, what we're really trying to do is just deal with these white supremacists, although they have plenty of laws to deal with them now. But since we're really trying to deal with these white supremacists, you know, you have to recognize how dangerous this are. We need more laws. And it's not just what you know. Look, they were also manipulating the Black Lives Matter movement. They're also, you know, ginning up the quote unquote black identity extremism. This will be used as part of a broader attempt, not only to criminalize protests in the most general sense, but to criminalize the very act of resistance to the exploitation and oppression that people are facing to an intense degree. So for us here at Breakthrough News, it really was important to start off today's show by reminding people what really happened in Minneapolis, what the real feeling on the street was. So we want to show some videos, some from us, some from others, from people who were there, who were taking part in the broader activities, about why they were there, what they were really doing. So this first clip we want to show, this is from our Breakthrough News coverage. And just to note here, since people are talking about peaceful protest again, this clip was taken just after we all in this protest had been tear gassed, despite doing nothing.
Can you tell us just real quick what brought you out here tonight?
I got to stand for my people. I got 3 sons. I got uncles. I got cousins. I got brothers. And this shit is not right. We've been quiet for too fucking long. We've been quiet. We've been peaceful. Now, it's time for revenge. Tear this bitch down.
Come on.
And I mean that from my heart. Tear it down. I ain't doing people like this.
And what do you say to the governor who's saying people are coming from outside, it's drug cartels, it's other people?
No, it's tired people. It's people that's tired of this bullshit right here, taking advantage of us. This is our shit. Without us, we wouldn't even been out of this shit.
Let's go.
That's why we gonna tear this bitch up.
Let's go.
Period.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Obviously, she didn't need the Boogaloo Boys to be motivated there. Clearly, it was not white supremacy or outside agitators or anything that was whipping up the level of anger that exists in the community, especially black working class communities in Minneapolis. We want to show you a compilation of videos that we've put together. These come from Unicorn Riot, which is an independent media organization that was also there on the ground in Minneapolis, and I think gives even more flavor to what was really behind this uprising.
I can't breathe! I can't breathe! 100% 10 toes for George. We are here to support all throughout it. Nobody should have went through that. He had handcuffs on. He did not resist the whole time. I've seen multiple videos. He did not resist, and they still felt the need to kill him. Somebody lost their life just living their everyday life, literally. Literally, it is sad. And yes, my community is tired. My community is tired. As you can see, that's why we have a riot.
What am I supposed to do as a black man when I'm helpless like that? What are we supposed to do? And to see all these people of all races to come out and support people that they don't even know, a stranger that became a martyr for this city is beautiful. And sometimes you gotta burn shit down to rebuild, you know?
Blacks and Browns united, bro. What the fuck? You see America? You see, when we all come together, blacks, whites, Mexicans, Native Americans, Chinese, with everybody, we come together, this is what happened. It's about time. This shit we gonna be able to tell our grandkids, like, yo, we burnt this shit down. They gotta feel us. All that protesting, marching, Martin Luther King bullshit, that shit is dead. Now we gotta feel us now. They gotta feel us now, period.
We gotta stop doing this to us. We need justice. How does man get killed like this?
I feel like the streets, man, is finally taking a step that we need to take, coming together and fighting these motherfuckers that we need to fight, bro. They evil, you feel me?
These bullies with guns trying to save the 3rd precinct. 3rd precinct gone. Sin don't live there no more. The murderous killers don't live there no more. The sin is gone.
You tell me. Sound like outside agitators? Sound like something that was just cooked up by some conspiracy of someone who has no connection to the city of Minneapolis or to the issue of police terrorism? No, it does not sound like that. It sounds like exactly what it was. And maybe I'm biased because I was there and I can say that, but you know, that is the true representation, what you saw of what was going on in Minneapolis. People pushed to the edge, pushed to the brink. They were not going to take it anymore. And it has to be said. No political avenue in this country, the Minneapolis City Council, the Minnesota State Legislature, the Congress of the United States, certainly not the president at that time, but not really now, either way. I mean, there's no political avenue that was taking any action in this country to address the issue of police terrorism, with over 1,000 people being killed every single year. And everyone knows that this is happening, and that it's disproportionately directed towards the black community in particular, working class people of all types. That's what this was ultimately about. But one final thing we want to show you here, that actually the day after, you may have heard that Wells Fargo burned down, we were able to go to a large rally at the Minnesota State House, which is something else that bears discussion here, or repeating, which is that, you know, really, as much as you only see certain images out of Minneapolis, it was like a 24-hour resistance, day and night, people doing all sorts of things. I mean, the city was in resistance. We were able to go to this large rally at the Minnesota State House and talk to a few people about how they were feeling about what was going on with the uprising.
It's crazy how they portray us in the media as these people that don't care. We're out here because we care. We care. In the middle of a pandemic, we're here supporting each other. This is what needs to happen. And until there is justice, it's going to keep happening. And let the buildings burn. If that's what needs to happen, we can rebuild, but you can't take a life and bring it back.
Native people, you know, we're standing on stolen land right here, right now. So the first looting happening on this land was from our people. Every single area that you step around here was looted and taken. It is stolen. So all these people who are being hypocritical about the people who are out here right now, talking about the corporations that can replace every single piece of merchandise that was stolen, well, you need to look down and realize that every single inch of land you walk on this Turtle Island is stolen.
Well, I couldn't have said it better than the people who we heard spoke tonight. So just take that with you and just remember that however this case with these Boogaloo Boys goes, the role they played in Minneapolis was marginal. It had nothing to do with the broader sweep of events there. And no matter what anyone tries to say about outside agitators or whoever that had come and tried to manipulate this protest, it's a lie. It's just a straight up lie. But it raises another question. Who are these Boogaloo Boys and what are they doing and how should we relate to that? There are some, I'm not sure why, but there are some who are out here saying, well, the Boogaloo Boys are basically good, or maybe not even basically good. Maybe I'm not being fair. But the fact that some of them were here at one of them, I guess, at the George Floyd protests, the fact that they saw one guy on a message board say something about police brutality, and then there's like one picture of another guy that's been circulated around the world of a dude with a whiteboard saying Boogaloo stand with George Floyd, there's somehow become this meme or whatever you want to call it that, yeah, these are just misguided people that can be a part of our team to have progressive change in America. Well, who are the Boogaloo Boys? First of all, you're probably, if you never heard of this, why are they even called Boogaloo Boys? It's hard to not even laugh when you say it, right? Their big thing is also wearing Hawaiian shirts. But they're called Boogaloo Boys because they won a second civil war in America. And some movie aficionados may know that the sequel to the movie Breakin' is Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. So they have called themselves the Boogaloo Boys because this is Civil War Part 2. I don't know. If you want to start Civil War Part 2, maybe that's one place to start about who you really are. Who started Civil War Part 1? Not progressive. But when you even look at what they're saying about the current moment right now, and there's sort of two debates here. One is what are the individual beliefs, and I'll come to that. But when you look at what they're saying right now about the Civil War and the need for a civil war, they're saying there's this massive tyranny that's fallen over America. But what is there, or are there examples of this massive tyranny that is over America, which requires us to rise up and potentially have a war that could kill millions of people? Well, for them, the main thing is mask mandates and lockdowns. Yes, what the main thing the Boogaloo Boys were up to in 2020, it was not protesting for George Floyd. Let's just be clear. It was being a major part of the anti-lockdown, anti-mask mandate protest. So the tyranny that they say is about to destroy America, which we must rise up against, is best and most indicatively seen in their view in the public health measures to try to keep millions of people from dying in a pandemic. What's another thing that they make a big point about? Red flag laws. Red flag laws are emergency provision that allow, through a pretty onerous legal process, to remove a gun from someone who's about to kill themselves or maybe kill someone else in an issue of domestic violence. It seems relatively unobjectionable, but for the Boogaloo Boys, preventing people from killing themselves, from killing their partners, or having anyone wear a mask, I guess, is the reason we need to rise up and have a second civil war. Now, the second piece of that is some people say, well, however misguided they may be, we have to classify them correctly. They're not all Nazis. They're not all white nationalists. In fact, when you look at their message boards, there are some people who are going back and forth. I wish I didn't have to explain this, to be honest with you. I mean, let's just be honest. If you're in a group and there's people in there like the Nazi terrorist organization Atomwaffen or their sympathizers, and you're thinking, let's reason with these people, then I think right there, it doesn't really matter what your own beliefs are. You're willing to accept just odious, genocidal views, again, as a part of your army in order to wage a war in the United States. But on top of that, just look at who they lift up. I mean, you'd think if you were saying you were a progressive person and there was going to be some sort of uprising or whatever it may be, that your precedents would be Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, I don't know, something actually good and right, not something terrible, like what they do. For instance, we'll pull up a clip here from The Guardian. newspaper, is a professor at Middlebury College who studies these things, said about the Boogaloo Boys, they hold up things like the McVeigh bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building and the armed response to Ruby Ridge as heroic moments in American history. So yes, their precedent is not, say, Nat Turner, but Timothy McVeigh. So that in and of itself should also give you an indication of who these people really are. And just to close here, coming to the sort of final issue that people point out about, well, some of them seem to be trying to open up a line of communication to those who are protesting racist police terror. I just think it's important to note here historically, this has a long history in the United States. White supremacists, white nationalists, far-right groups are always looking for any group of individuals in the black community that they can try to find some sort of, modus vivendi or cooperation with by which to essentially eliminate black people in America as an opposition to their plans to dominate the country with their terrible white supremacist and hyper pro-capitalist, it should be said, views. None of these things have ever actually succeeded in creating a real alliance because black people aren't stupid. They're not going to make an alliance with people who best case are arguing for them to be genocide, worst case arguing for them to be genocided, and best case live in a semi-slave type of society. So just because there's a handful of people saying let's reach out to some black people is not more broadly indicative of the fact that they're definitely down to have Nazis in their army to start a new civil war. I think it's relatively clear who's who and what's what. Unfortunately, some people don't see that, but this is a critical issue on both sides. On the one hand, it will be used to tamp down the righteous anger and the legitimate uprising of people under domestic terrorism. And on the other hand, it's being used and will continue to be used as an attempt to misguide people about the type of coalitions we need to build. And we need to unite all sorts of people in this country, no doubt about it, but it can't be on any basis that embraces any form of racism, bigotry, or supremacy whatsoever. That's not the Boogaloo Boys. They aren't in this movement. Well, sometimes we have a little shenanigans from the booth. They like to get a laugh out of me when we're trying to switch gears a little bit here. Obviously, it was a very important story. We want to talk about something else, something much lighter here as we move the story forward. Don't forget to share this live stream so everyone can see what we are talking about. I want to turn to our engineer, producer, jack of all trades, Juan Peralta in the booth. I'm turning around so you can see me. I don't know if people are looking at my back now. Sorry, I'll turn back around. But I wanted to turn to you, Juan, because we have been talking all week about the notorious Conor McGregor getting knocked out. Technical knockout, I know, technical knockout, although he looked like he was asleep. I gotta be honest with you. But be that as it may, there are a lot of feelings about Conor McGregor. Juan, how did you feel when you saw the notorious go down under a flurry of punches?
Flurry of kicks.
Flurry of kicks, punches. He was struggling. It was everything. That moment where you. I thought of kicks. Actually of
it was punches.
Rocky 3. Throw the towel. Throw the towel.
What can I say? I just like I always have a fondness for seeing racists get beat.
I mean, I think that's a very good point. I mean, it really. I guess you could say this is in the fight game a thing, but I almost felt, Juan, maybe it's because he was who he was fighting, it almost got downplayed this go around at this fight on Fight Island. Like McGregor's whole history of building up his legend, so to speak, on the basis of being the Great White Hope explicitly.
Yeah, I mean, Conor McGregor is like one of those characters, like in wrestling, that people call a heel. So a heel, for those who don't know, is like a villain in wrestling. And he plays that character. But I think something that is forgotten is that, like, you can play a villain, but that doesn't mean that you get to be racist. It doesn't mean that you get to be a bigot. Yeah, like, one of my favorite heels of all time is The Rock. You know, it doesn't matter what your name is. You know, like, and he did all that without being racist.
I mean, it's true, but it's a very good point. Donald Trump, a famous heel, he wasn't racist then, but I guess he's racist now. But no, I think it's crucial. I mean, it speaks obviously to, you know, the nature of these entities, the boxing promoters, Dana White and UFC. It's all like lowest common denominator, primal, what'll get people to watch.
I mean, that's super true, but there's also like a culture of like right wing in the UFC. Like McGregor himself called Trump the best president in U.S. history, which to me is surprising because I didn't know McGregor was a historian of U.S. presidents. But I guess after seeing the last fight, he might be considering a job switch.
I mean, you know, given some of the people that are in Congress now, wow. When you think about, I actually am honestly wondering if he could name more than like 6 presidents. I don't know, but you are right. There are a lot of fighters, UFC and otherwise, who love Trump.
Yeah. And I don't know. I feel like whenever this conversation is brought up about McGregor and even other UFC fighters have said racist things or bigoted things, people will say like, you know, like I separate the sport and the person, which is hella ironic when you think about people like Kaepernick. Right? Because Kaepernick was kneeling because black people were being killed by the police, by police terror, and everybody was saying that, like, get your politics out of this. But McGregor's talking about how Trump is the best president, and nobody says anything to him. He calls Mayweather, he called Mayweather boy and tells him to dance, but nobody has an issue with that because, you know, that's the character he's playing.
Right.
It's very convenient. You know, when you're being racist, you're playing a character.
It is very convenient. For Conor McGregor, it's fun for SportsCenter anchors, you know, to kick it around and joke about it. But with Kaepernick, I mean, he's still not in the league. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. There is a right wing. I was thinking about this. It's a slightly different issue, but with Tom Brady going back to the Super Bowl. You know, I mean, like this. You have this massive far right entity across all sports that's considered like not bringing politics into sports. You're only bringing politics into sports when you go against the grain. That grain.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. People don't talk about it. You know, Tom Brady himself, a big Trump supporter. I'm sure he's said multiple racist things. And he's had scandals, like football scandals. And he's still playing.
Deflategate.
Deflategate. You know, and he's still playing. But it's really what is prioritized, right? You know, when somebody's racist, you push that to the side because they perform. But when somebody's calling out injustice, then it's a problem.
It's a very good point. I mean, it's honestly shocking when you look at some of these people who they just pulled off the street in the NFL this year, literally, that Kaepernick is still in there. No, I think that's an important point. And I mean, it's obviously a double standard that we've been seeing. It's obviously a double standard that we'll continue to see, you know, in the context of it. Worth also noting here that UFC is one of the biggest union busters of any company in America, quite frankly. I mean, I know they operate around the world, but brutally crushed and, you know, just exiled anyone in UFC that ever tried to organize a union so far.
I mean, it just tells you. So, like, UFC is a perfect representation of, like, what the U.S. holds up. You know, racism, bigotry, union busting. And they're racking up millions of dollars.
Billions of dollars.
Yeah, billions.
On the back of it. Well, you know, we'll see what happens here. I mean, certainly on the UFC front, I mean, I don't know. It seems like McGregor's career could potentially be over here. And the sort of rumored fight between him and Khabib, which I don't think was ever going to happen, that is probably now out of the window at this point. At least this is what Khabib and his team are saying. So it could be the end for the Notorious.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have to see. He's currently on a medical suspension because of his leg. I think it's for like a couple months. So we'll have to see. But, you know, I don't want to just, you know, end things on a bad note. I just want to see, like, you know, it's like super important, like what people actually do in the long run. Yeah. And, you know, even though like McGregor is a racist, you know, something beautiful happened actually in his hospital stay. He had a surprise visit. If you look at the screen real quick, please, Eugene, you'll get to see who visited McGregor at the hospital.
Oh, the best part is that's not even the funniest one of those memes you showed me today. But I'm telling you, it really did look like my man was just asleep. I didn't even really know what to say. The Bernie meme. Roll it down. In the good news, the Bernie mitten issue, they've raised $1.8 million for charity, I believe, for Meals on Wheels in Vermont. So it all ended up well. Juan, I appreciate you joining us for our inaugural Freedom Side sports segment.
All right, thank you for having me.
All right, well, we're going to switch gears here to another very important issue, and we were very happy to have the opportunity to talk to Patrick Warren Jr. Now, just really quickly, for those who are just tuning in, by the way, hit that share button, or who haven't heard about this at all. Patrick Warren Sr. was murdered earlier this month at his own house, in his own lawn. What took place is he was having a mental health crisis. His family, his extended family, was there. They reached out to really. The day before there had been a similar incident, there was a mental health professional that came out, not just a cop. So they had reached back to the same organization or entity under the city there in Killeen, Texas, to hopefully send someone else out who was not a cop, who was not going to kill someone. This cop shows up and he just murders Patrick Warren Sr. It's brutal. There's video from a Ring doorbell. There's also video from a body cam. We're not going to show that to you here, but it's very easy to find if you want to see. Just super brutal situation, absolutely tragic in so many different ways. We were able to interview a little bit earlier Patrick Warren Jr. and also Lee Merritt, who is the attorney for the Warren family, about not only the case itself, but some of the things they're hoping for moving forward.
Responsible for the murder of your father. But the question hanging over my mind is it fair to say that the system is also responsible for his death?
Absolutely. I think that, the training that they get, to the protocol and, all the procedures, like I said, we had an officer that came out the day before who was a great help. And with this officer that came out, with us not even knowing that an officer was coming out, I felt like just the system of that wasn't there to help us,
This officer knew that he was going to the home of somebody in crisis. He would have had sufficient notes from the day before to know exactly what he would find. And what he found was an unarmed man in his home who wasn't behaving aggressively. The officer described in his reports later that he felt that Mr. Warren was behaving bizarre. Well, of course he was behaving bizarre. He was in a mental health crisis. That's what he should have expected. He used that strange or bizarre behavior to justify the use of deadly force because it gave him something to fear, and his training told him that he had the right to terminate that threat. It concerns me that, of course, this training would directly conflict with mental health responses in the so-called training that he would have received in that department. It's a combination of all those violations that made me believe this is one of the worst cases that I've come across.
People need help, but instead they're being killed. I mean, what does this say about the way we're relating to mental health issues in this country?
I think it shows that they don't really care because, something of the mind is not something you can see. The way that they handle it, and it concerns me not only, for my father, but I tell people this. I have a little brother who has Down syndrome. And I've seen a video of an autistic, child being murdered by the police because they just they didn't proceed with caution. They didn't have patience. So it's something that concerns me because I always wondered about my brother. Never in a million years I thought it would be my father. So I think we need more precaution. I think we need more training. I think there's a number of things we need. It scares me because I feel like this can happen to someone else. I still feel like this can happen to me. Like, what if I'm having a bad day, and someone can't calm me down and I'm just like, leave me alone. And I'm not listening to what anyone, officer, anyone is saying to me. Could I be killed just because I'm having a bad day? So it's something that just kind of weighs on me. I think we should train people to be human beings. I feel like it's simple things that can save lives. Caution, patience. If you walked into the house and your loved one was having a bad day, you wouldn't pull out a taser on them. You would say, "Hey, what's going on? Hey, how's your day? What's wrong? Talk to me." I just feel like being a simple human being could save someone's life. So.
Furthering the answer to that question about what we perceive as justice in this case, justice would be the immediate arrest of Officer Reynaldo Contreras. Anytime that an unarmed man is killed in his pajamas in front of his family, shot to death and on his front lawn, the very least we can ask for is an immediate arrest, interrogation, and a professional prosecution, which has yet to take place yet. The city of Killeen seems to have come forward justifying this use of force. And so not really taking the time to take an introspective look at its policies and procedures in changing the things that are deadly, because we believe even in this case, in Bell County, there is a program that seems to work. It worked for Mr. Warren the day before, which was a mental health resource officer, a plainclothes officer, coming to the home and speaking to Mr. Warren like a human being. And so we would like to see more funding behind systems like that. And the city of Killeen and Bell County owes this family justice, and that justice must come in the forms of criminal and civil accountability. And before any lip service, those two things must take precedent.
I think that's extraordinarily important. And just quickly as a follow-up, if you could, I mean, what are some of the steps in, I guess, the legal element of this in terms of, I mean, whether they will or will not do something? What should people be watching for in terms of, I guess, that timeline?
Well, people should both be watching and demanding immediate action. So the timeline, the appropriate timeline for the arrest of Ray Contreras was on January 10th, the date of the incident. The fact that it's been going on 3 weeks since this incident without an arrest, it should be an affront to the people of Killeen and really to justice lovers around the country. This case should be being investigated. I imagine the investigation of the Texas Rangers should take no more than 2 months, 60 days from the incident, and then it should be presented to a grand jury where the people of Bell County will make a decision whether or not criminal charges will move forward. The prosecutor there is Henry Garza. Henry Garza has lost the faith of this family because he has failed to follow his own policies and procedures in investigating this case so far. And so we're asking for a special prosecutor to get involved. All of these things, Patrick Warren Jr. is championing on Justice for Patrick Warren across social media and online. And so people can find ways to get involved, sign petitions, donate to the family, and organize. This is a case that demands justice in a system that is prone to simply deny that to families. And the only time the system bends to the will of a single family is when the community stands up for them. And Mr. Patrick Warren Jr. is offering the community ways to continue to stand up and fight with them until we achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's critically important. And Mr. Warren, I want to also ask you here, I mean, I think a lot of people who are going to be watching this are maybe hearing this for the first time. What's your message to them about why you want to see people get involved in this effort and what you are hoping can grow from your organizing efforts?
What I want to see happen from this is I want to see new policies put in place. I want to see training put in place. I want to see immediate, changes within the police department. I would say this: if I went to someone's home and I did something to them, and they were unarmed, they would be, I would be in jail. I would be arrested. I wouldn't want it to take so long for just an action like that to be taking place. For someone to be arrested, my mom has to sit here every day wondering what's going to happen. So I would want to see things like that immediately put in place, but I would want to see people organizing and advocating for this all across the country, because I feel like, and I keep saying it, I feel like this can happen to anyone. I never thought this could happen to me. I think it's a time to really figure out like what we can do as a community to come together and figure out, who could we vote in, the changing of prosecutors, the changing of DAs. I want to, those are the things that are really on my mind, like that weigh heavy on me, just because I'm looking at, I can't help but think about our experience with those people right now. Like as you're talking to me, I'm still thinking about those things. Us as people of color and people with mental health disorders and things like that, you see how unfairly we're treated. We're needing people to uprise all over the world so people can know like, hey, this is actually happening to us. But to help us actually make change, because I feel like we have a voice. We should be standing up. We should be talking about this. We should be doing everything we can to make sure this is heard everywhere.
I wanted to address the international community directly. We were afforded the opportunity to speak with the United Nations Commission on Police Violence in America. Of course, we talked about Mr. Patrick Warren Sr., who was murdered in front of his home, in front of his family during a mental health call. Unfortunately, we were able to rattle off several similar cases. Damian Daniels, a military veteran who was murdered on his front lawn by Bexar County sheriffs during a mental health crisis. His family called the Red Cross for help. We were able to talk about veteran Everett Palmer, who had his brain, heart, and throat removed before his body was returned to his family without explanation. We talked about Stephen Taylor, who was at the grocery store suffering a mental health crisis when he was killed. We talked about Darius Tarver, who was hoping to become a law enforcement officer himself and follow in the footsteps of his father, and was a member of the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement. He was killed suffering a mental health crisis at his apartment complex carrying a frying pan. This is a pandemic that you all hear only about the worst, most atrocious cases of police violence in America. But America boasts the deadliest police culture in the industrialized world. America boasts the largest prison population in human history, and maintaining that system of mass incarceration has resulted in countless suffering and oppression of Black and brown people all over the country, and it demands universal condemnation. The same way that so-called industrialized or modern countries condemn misconduct and terrorism all over the world, African Americans living in the United States have been in a constant state of terrorism and harassment and genocide. And the international community has been relatively quiet. I am calling on Africans and lovers of justice throughout the diaspora to join our voice in demanding immediate reform and even a revolution in the United States.
And if you just tuned in the middle there, that was an interview with Patrick Warren Jr., who is the son of Patrick Warren Sr., murdered by police in Texas earlier this month, and Lee Merritt, who is an attorney for the Warren family. We recorded that a little earlier in the day, as you might be noticing, because the wake for Patrick Warren Sr. is this evening. So thank you to his family and everyone involved in the case for doing that. And again, on Instagram, Justice for Patrick Warren, at Justice for Patrick Warren. Patrick Warren Jr. is running that IG page and using that as a way to get the word out. So if you're on Instagram or can spread the word, Justice for Patrick Warren, definitely get involved and just do whatever you can. We're going to move forward here to another similar related issue as we consider coming off policing and moving to mass incarceration. We want to turn to the state of South Carolina. Now, some of you certainly may not be surprised to hear that, like just about every other state in South Carolina, there's some truly brutal prison conditions. There's also some very strong prison organizing. And, you know, there's actually been quite a bit that has happened this week in terms of folks who are incarcerated in South Carolina, their family, friends, allies, compatriots, and comrades on the outside pushing very hard to, you know, address these conditions, but also to stop retaliation against those who are advocating inside. So we're very happy to be joined as we continue the show here by Letitia Amara, who's the founder and director of the Black Liberation Fund, also a community activist. Her husband, David, is incarcerated in a Perry Correctional Facility. And we are also joined by Morgan Anderson, also an activist in South Carolina, and her mother is incarcerated in Camille Graham Women's Prison. Thank you both so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you. Hi, good evening.
Good evening, good evening. Well, I'll tell you, the pleasure is all ours. Letitia, let me direct the first question towards you here. You know, I first learned about what was going on with David in particular because of a phone zap earlier this week and calls for individuals to push back against the retaliation against him by prison officials. You know, talk a little bit about some of what he was advocating for inside and the broader conditions that are being faced by prisoners.
So with David specifically, on January 6th, he was thrown into lockdown incarceration. That's generally solitary confinement. What happened actually was he had an officer who he filed previously grievances about wearing masks, about using words like you boy and people and things like that. This particular officer that day, for whatever reason, even after no words was said between him and David, he put him on lockdown. After he went to lockdown, they held him down. They shaved his head. They shaved his face. They threw him into doors, and he sat there for 7 days without us knowing anything at all. The only way that I knew anything in particular is because I've made a habit of actually calling up to Columbia and to different entities to ensure this person's safety while we're going through this process, because parole is in February. When he called, we learned of everything that had happened. We've continued to strive to make sure that people understand and know the initial conditions of where he got there, what happened. Not only that, but also support parole so we can see him home in February, because this is a direct attempt by SCDC to stopgap that. And that's one thing that we're not trying to have do in this moment. It's just not a safe condition. This is not a situation where people should be kept in captivity for absolutely no fault of their own, other than an officer having a ridiculously bad day. And if we all understand what happened on January 6th, we can all understand what kind of day that was and where this country is in regards to that.
Well, Letitia, let me also ask you this as a follow-up question. I mean, are you surprised by any of this? What is the reputation, for those who aren't in South Carolina, I guess, maybe those who are even watching abroad, for the South Carolina Department of Corrections, are these types of behaviors and unsafe, unhuman conditions in many ways, is it par for the course or something else?
For me, from what I've seen, I was surprised that it was going to be such a direct attempt at such a time, just because I had faith or I had hope that it was not going to get this serious so quickly, right? Because we all like to believe in the system, even though I fought so hard to fight against it. If that makes any sense to you all. However, I was not surprised. I was not surprised at all, because he's always one who is going to advocate for himself and others despite the condition or whatever that looks like for him. A really big thing in SEDC has been the PPE, the wearing of masks, just particularly because of the effect of COVID and how that's been had into the institutions. There was periods of time where they were on quarantine until the symptoms went away, until people had no temperatures, so whatever that may have been. They went 36 hours, sometimes with no showers. They went with little food, only 2 meals on weekends. People are still without medicine. The conditions have been extreme. They've had no visits with family. They've had no programs. They've had no classes. They've had no entrance with their institutions except for the officers themselves. So this particular thing is very important. Officers like even the wardens and everybody on the head, they like to say, well, the inmates should be wearing their PPE. But the PPE for inmates, they're a captive audience. Essentially, the people who are bringing it in are the people who are coming in and out every day with their family members, who are going to parties, who are going different places, who have this disregard for utter human life. And that's what I like to remind people. These are human beings, okay? Yes. We're not talking about puppies. It's not a homeless shelter. You know what I'm saying? This is an actual situation where you take away someone's rights and you have them subject to conditions below par, even that any human being right now on the outside, people cry and whine every day because they don't get to go to dinner or they didn't get to go to the gym or anything else like they want to have. But this is not that type of situation. It's a captive audience, so to speak.
Morgan, I think a lot of times when we're talking about mass incarceration, the issue of women who are incarcerated often just doesn't get brought up to the same level or the same knowledge of the broader country, even people who care about mass incarceration. Camille Graham Women's Prison, I guess maybe my first question, is it any better? What are women facing there?
A lot, actually. Actually, starting January 22nd through the 25th, they did not receive any other medication. Diabetics were going without insulin. Psych patients were going out medicine. My mom was one of the people who has COVID right now in the prison, and she's being quarantined, but they keep bringing new people in that are positive and mixing them. So they're stuck pretty much in this, not ward, but they're stuck and they cannot leave. They're not in Gen Pop. They all have COVID, but they're all coming in at different times when they're positive. And since she's been down there, she didn't get her medicine from the 22nd through the 25th, and they finally gave them their medicine. But even today, she called me, and they didn't give them their medicine. Half the people got their medicine, the nurses just left and didn't distribute the rest, and there's nothing they can do. And as Letitia said earlier, they're only getting 2 meals on the weekends, and they can't leave. It's just ridiculous. Like, yeah.
No, the other question I have, well, for both of you, but I'll just ask you, Morgan, to start. I mean, how does it feel to have an incarcerated loved one in a situation like this? I mean, obviously there's so much going on in this pandemic, but I don't know, to even the limited amount that a lot of times many of us can do for our loved ones, obviously it's not the same situation. I just wonder how it feels to be facing this as someone on the outside with someone they love inside.
Honestly, it really frustrates me because there's not much I can do, and she's incarcerated. People don't care about the incarcerated. People think just because someone committed a crime, they no longer have rights and aren't human. I just really don't understand, and that's just, to me, is so frustrating because some people just do not get it until it happens to someone they love.
I think that's very true. Letitia, your thoughts on the same question?
This is what I really wanted to say when it comes to incarcerated persons' rights. My thing is, I used to be a member of Black Lives Matter Charleston, so I used to advocate for Black lives. What I noticed is that we go real hard once these Black lives are dead in the streets or whatever these things are. But when it comes to the actual increase in the police presence, the jailing of these peoples, and once these bodies are within the institutions and these walls, they are not coming out. They are not being rehabilitated. These are human beings. These are the same Black Lives Matter, the issues that we continue to strive for and we're yelling about every single day. But when it comes for regular, everyday, just shining a light on what's happening, on the injustices that's happening inside, on all of these things, there seems to be crickets. In South Carolina, there is no way that this system should have gone so long with so little checks and balances. They actually expect an inmate to be able to grieve and prepare themselves for disciplinary hearings and then treat them like they're children and don't believe a word they say. So it makes the whole farcity of it null and void, if that makes any sense. So we've got to have a greater and larger conversation, because she is absolutely right. Because once you are incarcerated, once you're within the walls, it's like you drop off the face of the earth somehow. And that's not logical, because when you come and you want a television spot, or when you come and you want a great story, somebody who strived within the walls and came out after 20 years, if they are a decent person, it looks like a great story. But what we're forgetting about is that there are millions of people that are coming out of the system broken people. So this is just a thing that has been happening since the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s and all of this stuff. Okay, we're catching the checks that have already been written. You know what I'm saying? These are actual real issues. These are things that we can have so many more voters. We can have so many more everything that we want and or need, but we already have the bodies and nobody seems to put any energy into that. And that to me is ridiculous. I mean, yes, they absolutely still deserve rights because they're human beings. This is not a situation where I should have to quantify or qualify a person to receive those types of rights.
You know, talking about shining a light, which is critically important. I mean, we only know about what's happening here because y'all are organizing, and it was, you know, we're privileged enough to be able to hear about it and to find out and to do this. Talk a little bit, if you could, Letitia, about the organizing that's going on around these issues.
Well, particularly with me, I am with Black Liberation Fund Charleston, so I founded that as a catch-all for protesters and protest arrests. And I really wanted to speak to that specifically because when my founder, Muhyiddin Baha of Black Lives Matter Charleston, when he was living, he used to be arrested and there used to be funds raised for that. Again, when Shango was arrested, there was funds raised for that, but he never made it outside those walls. And just his arrest alone, his total sentence is 19 years for speaking out against his local own injustice. You know what I'm saying? The maximum that he's supposed to get for that is 15 years. To be clear, right? So he got 10 years for resisting arrest, 4 years for threat of an officer. This is after a community meeting now. So he was just speaking worth, truths to power, and then an additional 5 years probation. So all that is 19 years to a sentence. So I say that and saying with the folks I'm working with in Black Liberation Fund, these are folks that were arrested after protests that we paid $200,000 for, $350,000 for their lives to come out of these situations. They've been charged with charges as many as one to the most we have. I think one fella is charged with like 16 charges. Now, these charges range in from like a trespassing charge to the largest could be arson or inciting a riot. These things carry a lot of years. And my worry and concern is that people in this state are going to continue to not act like it's happening. They're going to continue to ignore it. And these guys are going to get multiple upon multiple years because the state refuses to drop the charges. Even though federals come in and say, okay, well, we'll get some. You know what I'm saying? And that's another thing that I've actually had a problem with, is that there's a federal overreach when it comes to the protests that happened after the George Floyd riot on May 30th of 2020. So these are larger issues. I am also working in the local jail, Alcana Detention Center, where these guys are waiting for hearings. Because of COVID, there's no general sessions court because it's unreasonable for them to, I guess everything else is in Zoom, but they cannot have court by Zoom. And they're only doing summary or magistrate. These people are waiting for high dollar bills to get reduced or whatever. And they're waiting for months and months and months upon years. I know there's one guy, he has 2 years in county jail already, and still hasn't had a hearing, still can't contact his lawyer. So these are problems, these are issues, and the state has got to reckon with it because what they're doing is worrying about everything else but that.
Mm-hmm. Morgan, I know earlier this week there was a call for folks to call and to write to the Department of Corrections around Camille Graham prison there. Talk about some of the organizing that's going on there now and what you'd like to see folks do more of.
My friend actually got me into it. I told him about my situation and what she was going through, and I usually do confide in him about these because he's with PSL of Columbia. So I told him, and he's like, okay, I'm going to put out a press release. And I was like, okay, we're going to meet at Camille Graham. We're going to stand with signs. We're going to talk to reporters and get the story out there. And I'm so glad we did because my mom actually saw it on the news that night. Everyone who's actually quarantined saw it, and they were so thankful and happy that we were doing that for them, and they felt like someone cared about what was going on. So I hope to do more organizing because things do have to change.
And I know exactly how you feel. I mean, the sometimes even the smallest actions really have a big, meaningful impact, and everything big starts small. That's what I always say. Before we get out of here, Letitia, I know you mentioned a couple times the Black Liberation Fund, of which you are the founder and director. I'm sure many people watching this are probably thinking how they can get in touch with the work you're all doing and support.
Well, we're on Facebook and IG as Black Liberation Fund. We're also on Twitter as Fund Liberation. We have Cash App, Venmo, and because we're now a nonprofit, Cash App, Venmo, and PayPal as CHS Rebellion 2020. If anybody wants to do donations, but basically you can call us, email us, and we're advocating for people behind the walls, and we're hoping to expand our reach that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Morgan, I know you said you were working with PSL in Columbia, South Carolina. That's how I heard about Camille Graham's women prison. But anything else you wanna plug in terms of where people should go or how they can do more?
I would recommend PSL of Columbia because that's really who I'm involved with because my friend always ties me into events and everything. So yeah, that's who I'd plug.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I really appreciate y'all coming on. In super critical issue, we'll do whatever we can to keep pumping it up across our Breakthrough News networks because these are super important issues. So once again, thank you so much for joining us on the Freedom Side. That's Letitia Amar, the founder and director of the Black Liberation Fund, and Morgan Anderson, who's a South Carolina activist. Thank you both.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the pleasure was certainly all ours, and thank you to all of our guests who joined us tonight. It's always a pleasure to have everyone, and always a pleasure to have you watching us here. Of course, this is brought to you by you, actually, by crowdfunding, so make sure you go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. Operators are standing by. I just wanted to say that, I'm sorry. But nevertheless, everything that we do, all the work that we do is only coming to us because of your fantastic and generous support. So the more of it you do, the more you can bring to us. And as we had last week, and I'll just encourage you to do this, check out our new podcast, It's Not You, It's Capitalism, which dropped last week. It's on Spotify, it's on SoundCloud. It comes out on Fridays. That's an example of the new and exciting content we're bringing you here on Breakthrough News. But for the freedom side, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you. You gotta be kidding me.